Alright, boys and girls, so I'm not here today, so we're going to do a math lesson anyway. I'm going to break this apart into 2 days, so one day you'll be watching a video for the first part of the math lesson, and then on Friday I'll be in school to teach the second part of the lesson. Remember, anytime I ask you to pause the video, you need to make sure you write it down. I will be checking your notes on Friday, and the sub will check your notes to make sure you can move on to the next activity. So it's very important that, hey, when I ask you to pause the video, I mean deposit, and that you need to make sure that you are writing your things down. So before you begin, let's get out to Math Journal page 279, please. And you'll need your note sheet from the sub too, so make sure you have that on your desk. And I'd probably have a math notebook handy, just so you can maybe use that for any note taking or any computation type work that you might need to do. So pause the video, make sure you're open to page 279, and you have all those other materials ready to go. Alright, so now that you have that, let's look at the math message here. Let's just look at problem 1. So all problem 1 is asking you to do is to find the area of this rectangle. And you guys have been finding areas of rectangles since 3rd grade, so you should be able to do this kind of in your sleep. We know, though, there's efficient ways and not so efficient ways to do this. One way to do this is, yes, to count each square unit inside this rectangle, but we know that is not the most efficient way. Remember, we know that area equals length times width. So, to do this, let's just label our units. I know from here to here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units. And I know my length is 1, 2, 3, 3.5 units, or my width. And then, so, since I know my area equals length times width, I know I need to do 3.5, so my area is going to equal 3.5 times 6. And now this is where I pause the video, and this is a good review. However, you multiply mixed numbers. If you like to set up your area model in your boxes, go ahead and do that. If you like to turn it into improper fraction and go from there, do that. But go ahead and do 3.5 times 6 and see what you get. So after you've done 3.5 times 6, you should get 21. So the area of this rectangle is 21 square units. And that is units there. It's hard to write with my mouse. So now, let's look for a second. Let's look at rectangle B. Or, sorry, not a rectangle, it's a triangle, right? Let's look at triangle B. I wonder how I could find the area of this triangle. Now again, since we do have grid paper, we know that one of these is a square unit, we could count. But if you notice with our triangle, we're not dealing with half squares here. We would have to really do some investigating to figure out, what fraction of a whole square this unit is. So there's got to be a better way, right? Well, there is. If we know how to find area of a rectangle, let's make a rectangle, okay? So let's look at this triangle here, and let's just make a rectangle around it. So my triangle ends here, and I'm just going to kind of make a rectangle just like this. So notice I didn't go all the way up here. I started where this triangle ended, drew my line across through half of these square units, and then down to meet here. So now I have this rectangle here. So go ahead and pause the video and make sure you draw an outline of the rectangle that we just made. So now that you've paused the video, let's find the dimensions of this rectangle. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 6 units this way. And let's see what it is this way. Well, it's 1, 2, 3. It's 3.5 units. So pause the video, make sure you have that labeled. Alright, so now that you have that, this is where it's going to be important to keep our work kind of organized here. We know how to find the area of this rectangle. In fact, some of you guys are probably like, hey, we did this already over here. Exactly, we did. So the area of this rectangle was, we can say, area of that rectangle, the A equals 3.5 times 6, and we knew that was 21. All right, So pause the video, make sure you have that written down on your journal. Now let's look at this. Well, we know the area of this rectangle can't possibly be 21. But how can we figure it out? Well, if you guys are noticing here, this rectangle here is exactly half of this rectangle. It's exactly half of it. So we can take our area that we found for this entire rectangle, we can take that area and we can divide it by 2. Or we can just find a half of it, which is the same as multiplying 21 by a half. So what is half of 21? And I bet most of you already know that. Half of 21 is 10 and a half, and I can show that. So we're going to take half of it. 21 times 1 half equals 21 halves. Or if I decompose that, that would equal 10 and 1 half square units. So one way to find the area of a triangle, guys, is visualize. Can you make a rectangle anywhere? And if you can, find the area of that rectangle and then divide that area by 2, or find half of the area of the whole rectangle, and that will give you the area of your triangle. Let's do another example. Let's look at this figure A, and I'll go to, so here's your figure A, okay? So this is the same kind of paper that you have here. Our first step to find the area of a triangle is to first, let's see if we can find a rectangle to make around here. So I can do that. So I'm going to start up at the top of my triangle here. I find that's easiest to not make our mistake because I can just draw, a straight line here through here, and then I'm going to connect it down to where the triangle ended down here. All right? And so you should be able to see that you kind of have 2 triangles here, this one and this one, and they're both, this is half of that triangle, and they both make this larger rectangle here. So my first step is to see if I can make a rectangle here, and I was able to do that. Step 2 is, well, pause the video first and let's get that. All right, step 2 would be to, let's label the dimensions of this new rectangle we made. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're centimeters, okay? So this one's 5 centimeters by 1, 2, 2.5, it looks like. 1, 2, 2.5, yep. So 5 by 2.5 centimeters. So pause the video and make sure you've labeled that down. All right, now that you have that labeled, our third step is to find the area of this larger rectangle. So let's just label our rectangle kind of like R for rectangle. So R equals 2.5 times 5. So now this is again where I pause the video and I encourage you to review, practice multiplying mixed numbers here. All right, so pause the video and go ahead and write down 2.5 times 5 and figure it out. So now that you've figured out 2.5 times 5, let's see if you got the same answer as I did. So 2.5 times 5 equals 12.5. Now remember, centimeters squared, I should say. Now remember, that's not the area of our triangle. That's the area of this whole rectangle that we created. But if you're noticing, the triangle, guys, is exactly half of our whole rectangle. So now we can find a half of 12.5. And remember, so we can find half of it. That's like dividing by 2. But I can do 12.5 times 1 half, and that should give me the area of my triangle. So again, good practice with mixed numbers here. If you're a box person, set up your boxes. If you are turning them into improper fractions, do that. Let's do 12.5 times a half and see what you get. So if you multiply correctly, 12.5 times a half, or that's like saying 12.5 divided by 2, you should get 6 and 1/4 centimeters squared. So the answer, the area of figure A, the area of this triangle, is 6 and 1/4 centimeters squared. So again, the area of our triangle was 6 and 1/4 centimeters squared. So what I want you to do now is you're going to raise your hand, get your notes approved. You should have everything that we went over on the video. If your notes are approved by the sub, then on Google Classroom, there is a list, a specific list of things to do. Follow the list. And if you ever need to get your pages checked, just make sure you raise your hand and the sub can check it. If you're having trouble, don't be afraid to ask the teacher, or don't be afraid to ask a classmate too. That is totally fine. All right? Tomorrow, I'll be in school and we'll be going over, hey, how do we find the area of these trapezoids? All right? It's pretty interesting. But again, we can kind of think about what we know about how to find area of a rectangle already. All right? So again, when you're done, make sure you go to Google Classroom and make sure you follow that list of things to do. All right? Off you go.